I've talked a lot about how dragons can communicate by using the means of technology, but what about the old ways of using ink and scrolls? Hi, I'm your host Heatwave, and in today's law episode, I'll be exploring written communication, mail, and how that mail is distributed across the Empire of Pareena. Just delivering my mail, make sure everybody gets their mail. Do my part, singing my tune. Oh, biscuits. Welcome back to the Wings of Fire spin-off series, Empire of Pareena. If you haven't done so already, please hit that like button. And if you haven't done so already, please hit the subscribe button. I mean, it means a lot to me. And maybe one day we might get as big as those other Wings of Fire YouTubers. But, Sandwing can dream, can't she? Anyway, so in today's law episode, I'll be exploring how dragons communicate through mail, how mail is sorted, and of course, how it's delivered. I'm actually, though, going to leave the distribution of heavy goods for a more dedicated episode. So, like every episode, well, involving history, let's begin with history. Now, the first written language was, of course, the hybrid hieroglyphs of the Sandwings. This ancient form of letters was, of course, the basis of the imperial alphabet, with many words that dragons use today either being original Sandwing words like inductii, which means loyal soldiers, if you've been following along with the story so far, but there are also words that have been, in a way, translated into common imperial tongue, and the best example of this is the Imperials called the SSG Walkers during the War of the Red Sands Panzerhounds. The word panzer comes from the old Sandwing word panzer, written out like this. Panzer basically means armor, or up-armored. Now, Old Sandwing wasn't really a language that was spoken by the common Sandwing, but they did know how to write it down. It was an expectation for them to know how to write it down. As we know, the Old Sandwing language, though, is mostly forgotten. Many don't understand what it says, except for some words that have survived. I myself can't read Old Sandwing. Strangely enough, Starkiller can? And I know he isn't from around this time. Anyway, why did the Sandwings develop a written language and mail system before anyone else did? Well, if we take a look at the map, the Mojave Desert, well, it's a big place. If we look at the other kingdoms at the time before the War of Unification, most of the winglets are very close together, meaning communication can come from one dragon flying to another part to have a conversation. But some dragons can't leave to go flying around and having a nice long chat. So of course, something was done to form a way to communicate over long distances, and the Mojave, again, big place. That's a big kingdom. There are lots of dragons spread vastly across the Mojave. To reach them, but not being able to leave where you're stationed, you're going to need some form of communication, and that's exactly what they developed. So originally, ink was very expensive for Sandwings to find, and they used camel skin to write, and they used a talon to write with. At first, small pictures, like actual hieroglyphs, were used to develop some form of message, and it didn't really work. So Sandwings began to break down these pictures into sounds and then form letters. So, of course, to teach this across the old Sandwing kingdom, it would logically take a long time, but as all records of history from the old Sandwing kingdom are in Sandwing, I can't actually give you a time date of when this became a very common practice before the War of Unification. At some point, though, they did swap to using scrolls, which were made from palm tree wood. Post the War of Unification, writing was then picked up with the same problems in early communication. Documents regularly had to be rewritten to meet any updates that would be applied for writing conventions. So, for example, when the founding principles were first written, they'd have to be rewritten as new writing conventions across the empire would be developed. Now, it is expected that all dragons across the Empire of Pareena can read and write. And to make a quick note with writing and how dragons do write, it is all done formally. No slang is ever used in imperial writing. This is probably done because, well, not every slang word is known across the empire, so it'd get very confusing if one sandwing used slang and wrote to a mudwing. The mudwing probably wouldn't understand it. So most writing conventions used across the empire are strictly a formal writing conventions. Now, of course, the scroll was first used to record anything, and it's still used today. But the book came into popular production, well, at first on a small Talon-made scale, but until larger production began during the newly formed age of industrialization of the empire in 1100. Books, or bounded scrolls, gained their popularity simply from the fact that they were a lot more sturdier and resistant than scrolls, but scrolls are still used. During this period as well, talons dipped in ink. In fact, this ink was actually squid ink and became the very first export of the Tail Islands and the Sea Wings. Anyway, talons were the only way for a dragon to really write, by dipping their talon into the ink and using it to basically scratch into the scrolls. Quills did exist, especially before the War of Unification, and after the War of Unification, the new empire did loot a lot of quills from the old Sandwing Kingdom, and thus the quill became an essential part of writing within the empire. It's one of the 4 founding principles. Now, I've spoken how dragons write, but how do they get their mail delivered, instead of just flying halfway across the empire just to say hi? Well, this is handled by the Department of Mail and Distribution, one of the most important and oldest departments of the imperial government. Their story starts basically as soon as the empire is founded. Some dragons were tasked in running messages, telegrams, important scrolls, number charts. These runners carried these letters near and far all over the new empire, utilizing special sky lanes up in the atmosphere to get around quickly. Without this early service, important documents and some early mailed goods wouldn't have reached the wider population, as this department also acted as the only way to get the word out of important events in the new empire, like the fact that a new empire was formed. Like most of the imperial government departments, it's broken down into a branch of sub-departments. There is a sub-department for commercial mail, so the holding, delivery, and distribution of mail that is open to the common population. Government mail, which is the holding, delivery, and distribution of mail that is open strictly to the government, which, after the adoption of radio communication, this department now only really transports large amounts of goods that are technically owned by the government. And next is heavy mail service, which is responsible for the transportation of heavy or large goods from government-run mining or agricultural operations, to give an example. While it seems that these sub-departments are quite small in their organization, they're a lot bigger when broken down further. So let's do that. Starting with commercial mail. Any dragon can send mail all over Pareena to another dragon. It helps save time and, of course, travel. Most major population areas and cities have an official imperial post office. It's here that mail orderlies sort and store local mail. When a dragon wishes to post mail, they must pay a 1 gold imperial coin, then provide a location for the letter to be delivered, a dragon to deliver it to by stating a name and a short description, or a business to deliver it to, and then they must provide a return location. But the smaller towns around the Empire, well, they all know each other, so this is a very simple thing. While there is no limit on how big a parcel or package can be mailed, the bigger it is, the longer it will usually take to get anywhere, for it may need to be transported by heavy equipment or long haulers. Smaller letters and telegrams will be handed to mail runners and will be delivered by Talon. Now, some dragons do have a mailbox, and others need to actually be given their mail by hand, which the mail runners will do. So let's talk about these mail runners. This is the term used to describe any dragon who delivers any mail, by any means, including the use of heavy equipment. Mail runners can be of any winglet, but sky wings are preferred as they can of course fly faster, but also mud wings are in demand for they can lift heavier loads. Of course, like every government dragon, they wear the standard imperial blue bakama with the Department of Mail and Distribution's identification symbol. They also carry a large amount of field equipment. It's expected that sometimes mail runners will be on dispatch for a number of days in rotations, and they're not issued with any rations. I mean, a smart dragon would carry some, except that the mail runners live off the land. They carry a bedroll, bags, pouches for use of storing personal effects, provisions, cooking supplies, and equipment, anything they need to be out in the field. Mail runners also carry a lot of bags or straps to carry scrolls and mail, usually mounted to the chest. Some mudwings also carry heavy packages underslung their body with straps wrapped around the belly and limbs. Mail runners also wear, sometimes, flight glasses or extra cloth for their uniforms. Now this is only for civil use of mail. What about government use of mail? Well, each government across Pareena has its own postal office, its own postal service, used to deliver, store, and organize mail distribution that involves government assets across Pareena. It does the same exact duties as the civil mail service, except it just deals directly with the government. Of course, as radios began to become into effect, the need for mail distribution for the government seems a bit pointless, so efforts were changed to focus on the distribution of government assets. This sub-department then began to spearhead any form of distribution of government goods to the wider population. Like, for example, when the government grants material assets to, say, an agricultural sector to bolster farmland, these materials will be delivered by this sub-department in particular. Those who work for the government sub-department are marked by a different symbol to those who work in the civil department. The last part of the mail and distribution department is about the moving of heavy goods. Now, I'm going to save that for a more dedicated episode discussing how the dragons of Pareena move their most heaviest goods and materials across the Empire. And that concludes another lore episode of the Empire of Pareena. Thank you very much for watching. I'll be back with more lore episodes about this expansive Wings of Fire series. But until then, this is your host Heatwave, signing off.